A few months ago, I was in the village, and my elderly auntie, 85, came to see me. Of course, she walked from her place to mine. And while she was in my house in the village, they took light probably 3 or 4 times. And each time the generator came on and supplied light. And she kept saying, did you have a special arrangement to those who provide lights? How come light just flickers and switches and all that? And I said, no, we turn on the generator, we buy diesel and all that. And she kept quiet. She went through whatever she came to do, finished, and as she was leaving, she called me. So what is it about you successful young people? She called me young. That seems to suggest that we, the elders and the poor, are not entitled to lives of luxury. When they take lights in my house, they take it for good. But here, I've been here for 2 hours, and each time it goes, it flicks. You must promise me something, she said. Whatever role you have to play in life going forward, you must ensure that 85% of our population get value, because without that, everything else is a failure. Why is Africa so blessed with so much resources? And yet, for any index of measurement you look at, we're way lagging behind. In oil and gas, whether it is Kenya, Libya, Algeria, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, wherever you look, Congo, Mozambique, we're producing tons and tons of oil, increasingly tons and tons of gas. At the last count, over 6.3 million barrels per day. And yet, we do not have electricity. You look at gold, whether it is Ghana, whether it's South Africa, whether it is Mali, we're producing tons and tons of gold, and yet we do not have money to provide infrastructure that is essential for energy. You look at platinum, coal, tin, diamond, bauxite, South Africa, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, tons of it. You look at solar. The existential sequences of solar energy transmission are highest in Africa. We're closest to the equator, we're closest to sunshine. And yet, we only have 1%. We provide about 60% of potential market dynamics for solar, but our penetration is about 1.2% of the global index. Without adequate energy, we will literally do nothing. Not education, not medicals, not production, not growth, not living standards, and of course, early descension into desperation and depression. And yet, we are not sounding the clarion call loud enough. Countries are just going by and getting by. So, the challenge for Africa is very clear. Electricity access in Africa is less than 43%. That is abysmally low by today's standards. And that is becoming commonplace in Africa. 80% of the African population do not even have clean cooking energy. You then just oppose that with the issue of cost. Even when you decide to address it, increasingly, most governments have gone to the private sector to try and address it. They've pushed on that responsibility from the public sector to the private sector. And as in the case of Nigeria and other countries, you're seeing that the prices have just risen astronomically. So that even when you do provide it, you can't buy it. And so we can talk of moving from 4,000 megawatts, that is our current level, to about 12,000 megawatts. That is an ideal level for us. But yes, when they provide it today, you can't buy it. I'm sure a lot of you are now beginning to experience band A and all that stuff, and the sheer exorbitant costs that come with that. So cost is an issue. But there's also a second issue to worry about. The world all over has moved from basic energy to what they call refined energy. And then from there now to clean energy is what we're aspiring to. And Africa still can provide 50% of the basic energy. So we're not only dealing with lack of energy and the basic nomenclature, we're in fact dealing with lack of refined or clean energy. And yet the world is racing ahead with clean energy. The world is saying to you that oil that you have is going to become extinct, quite frankly, as a commodity in the next 15 to 20 years. And we're waiting. And the world is saying they're setting benchmark, and all of us are signing on to all these benchmarks of what we need to deliver from COP. COP 29 just finished. with 300 billion put aside as potential funding for developing countries that need help. But other than lining up to collect the money, are we going to move straight to clean without even providing the basic? Why is this problem perpetual in Africa? And it's not just energy. Any way you take agriculture, you take all of them, you take education. The first is continental stereotype. Every index you look at is an index of poverty in Africa. Everybody is poor. And I'm one of those who just say Africa cannot be poor. You can't have all these resources I just said and you say Africa is poor. Something is wrong with the global community in terms of how they're stereotyping Africa. But more important for me is that somehow Africans have come to accept that as the basic allowable circumstance. So we all say we are poor. One of the things that puts me off greatly is when I see groups of heads of state lining up like school captains, and they go to China and they line up for giveaways. And I'm wondering, where did we get to this? How are you going to negotiate good terms for those donations or funding this thing if all of you are in one room with different strategical understandings, different nomenclatures of needs, different patterns of growth, and you're all struggling to get a piece of the 2 or 3 or 4 billion that is handed over by China? The second is unfavorable resource monetization. What stops us from looking at some of these minerals and resources that I talked about? I'm finding a group of highly intelligent financial analysts and creatives who can come around and be able to put value, whether in the stock exchange or whether in the funding platform, to those resources while still on ground. Why are we sitting on volumes of resources and the whole world's telling us you have to come line up and take whatever terms we give you for money? Then there's the policy uncertainty. Everywhere you go in Africa, there are policies running head and shoulders all over themselves. There is no stability in policy. And as governments move from one country to another and from one regime to another, policies begin to change. So for the investor, he never can really tell what the policy will be in a 10-year spectrum or in an 8-year spectrum for those who run 4 years of democracy. So there has to be there has a policy consistency within African countries so you can understand what you're dealing with. Then there's the colonial geographical framework. We have all been carved out into these little cabins as countries. And everybody's protecting this nutshell country of their own. And so today you can't move around. I go around to teach in various African countries. And one of the difficulties I see is that even to travel from one African country to another is a hell. You almost have to get into Europe to get into Africa. Why? Because everybody's protecting borders that, quite frankly, historically don't even exist. Now imagine what it will look like. Just imagine what it will look like if tomorrow Africa became a country and all these countries became states and all these presidents became governors. And you then can look at the entire volume of resources. You can look at the whole sheer size of 1.2 billion people. You can look at the global resources that I just outlined before we started. And we confront the first world and the second world with this sort of strength. Imagine what it will look when an investor is coming into Africa and realizes that the policies are the same. And so you can pick where you invest, and countries or regions then or states then will begin to attract you on the basis of behavior, speed, IT application, attitude to investment, as opposed to numericals. Imagine what it will look like. And then, of course, there's the big elephant in the room, the element of fraud. Now, what tends to happen is that earnings from fraud abroad stay abroad. They're invested. You find a guy who is duped the stock exchange of billions, and he's invested it in America, and then just caught the other day, he goes back to jail, but the money remains in America and is bringing work somewhere. The fraudulent repositories in Africa go abroad. So not only are you deprived of services at a reasonable cost, not only are you deprived of the income that you have, but indeed, that money goes abroad and creates volume and creates value, and then you're left even further deprived. So it's like you're stolen from a second time. There is no real poverty in Africa. There is a perceptive marketing poverty that is disseminated globally, and we've got to rise above that medium. Then there's a clean energy phenomenon. I will talk about clean energy when I have basic energy. Right now, African leaders are signing up to COP. Fantastic. And I think we need to watch it and we need to do something about it. But, first of all, we need to go ahead and provide basic energy for our people. Then we can talk about how to clean up that energy that we provide. Let us think big. Stop thinking small. We should stop selling ourselves cheap. Let each country begin today to choose 2 or 3 major mega projects in the energy sector that it may not have money for, but let it step back and find out what resources it has that can be adequately monetized to fund those and begin to go at it. Believe me, the bigger they are, the better they finance and the quicker they finance that you get. The smaller they are, the more meaningless it is for most financing houses. Let us think rich, because indeed we are rich. We're probably the richest continent in the world. We have very green resources. Our pollution levels are less than 2% of global index. We have resources that are sitting in ground. We have human beings, population, number 1.2, probably rising at a faster level. We have some of the biggest thinkers and smart Alex in the world in every human index, doctors, lawyers, ITs, whatever. They're all simply not here. They've all gone abroad to find a means of a better environment to work at. But let us think rich. Your wealth is in your people, it is in your resources, and it is in your positioning of your continent. Let us think smart. How do we, for example, package solar, package our sunlight and sunshine in such a way that we can place it in the stock market? Africa needs to begin to align itself properly. The only time when African leaders go to state visits are when they're going for needs. We must avoid that. We must go from an element of strength. And I remember the very hawkish days when people like General Gowon and the rest used to go on state visit because Nigeria was needed. Nigeria was revered and loved. And everybody tried the state banquets for you. We must go back to that. We must think global. And the world has become a single small village. Everybody is together. So you can't afford to be in isolation. So think global. What can you do that enables you not just to meet your own internal, local, regional, or continental needs, but also to meet global exportation needs? That is when people begin to take you serious. You cannot work in isolation. The numbers that we send out in the global markets are just not attractive enough. Are you aware that 40 years ago, Dubai actually borrowed 20 million pounds from this country called Nigeria because they needed it for development? That's the same Dubai today. You can't have visas to go visit. But why not? The reason is that they found leaders who were ready to change the status quo. They believed in themselves. They began to think big. When you think of that, you ask yourself, why can we not? Then let's think value. Value means that at the end of the day, you are helping those who are within your sphere to get benefits. Countries that have succeeded have been countries where the rulers have focused on the value for their people. How do you ensure that people get access to energy? How do you ensure that the quality of life is better? How do you ensure that people can reach their very peak? Think local ring fencing. And here I go back to the story of my auntie. Ring fencing simply says, can you look at your local communities, the villages, the small cities, and create an energy supply structure that meets their very simple, very cheap need? Their consumptions are usually very, very little. In 10 to 15 years, whatever we are doing, we must harness what the existing resources are and provide energy on a 100% basis for our citizens. 10 to 15 years max, whatever it takes. In the medium term, which is about 15 to 25 years, I'd like to see us then to begin to go into identifiable new opportunities that are going to give us even greater provision. Something is wrong with how we are positioned as the black people of the world, with how we see ourselves. We need to begin to change that narrative. Long-term, 25 to 40 years, the mega projects, exportable energy, and then you begin to go into the clean energy indexes. In other words, first meet your basic needs, then begin to clean up your sources of supply to achieve that. The energy implications for Africa are very grave if we do not do the right thing soon. Our standard of living is dropping, but very soon it will get to a negative index. It is that bad. Colonial conceptions that we have must be checked off so that we can move forward as a continent. Education will suffer if we do not have adequate electricity. Suffer in very many ways. If you do not have energy, how are you going to compete? Without energy, you cannot do any production. Right now, there's literally no production taking place in Africa. Everything is an assembly process. We need to move from that concept. So today, I call on policymakers and leaders. You've got to be bold. You've got to be energetic. You've got to be futuristic. You've got to create policies that create value for your people. I call on the rich to begin to meet and look at cross-border opportunities within Africa. Forget these narratives of carved silos. Push your leaders to remove those silos, remove visa requirements, and begin to take investments where they matter most. It doesn't matter where those investments are. When they eventually happen, it will benefit the whole of Africa. I call on intellectuals, wherever you may be, to begin to create smart solutions for some of these ideas, because you need to begin to give back. In conclusion, I call on Africa to please awake. We are simply in slumber. We've been in slumber for too long. Slumber of self-belief, self-degradation, slumber of complaints and confusion. Colonialism is long gone. Slavery is long gone. This is us. Whatever we suffer today is what we've brought to bear on ourselves. Let us reawaken the pride that Africa used to have. Energetic, noble, bold, creative. Let us light flicks, light switches. Let us turn on the light. Let me be able to go back to my Auntie Elizabeth soon and have a smile crisp-carpet her wrinkled face, because she suddenly realizes that we've begun again, and that someday soon, hopes will come, even if not in her lifetime, then in the lifetime of her children and her children's children. Let me be able to see Abdullah when next I see him and say, Africa finally awoke, and things have begun to move. Tomorrow beckons with hope. Let the energy world come alive again. Thank you.